Hello YouTube. Do we know much about the life of the animals that we see every day? Many believe that the life of animals has already been sufficiently studied and understood, but in fact from time to time animals demonstrate completely inexplicable behavior. This is at the same time a kind of intelligence, social interaction, or even a manifestation of some kind of parapsychological, or you can say paranormal abilities. I'll just tell you a few stories of this kind that were collected by Soviet researchers, letters from eyewitnesses of the events that, for example, came to the central newspapers of the USSR. Of course, this is only a small fraction of what is hidden from us and was accidentally noticed by the people that reported it. There are a lot of such evidence, but science ignores the evidence since it cannot provide any coherent, logical explanations for the observed behavior. So let's begin. The title here is A Silent Meeting in a Vacant Lot. This is from a letter of Sherbina, that's the last name, a person from Kamenets-Podolsky. It's a town in western Ukraine. One late evening, I was returning home after a work shift. There's a wasteland between the factory and the village. Although there is really nothing to worry about, we usually go through it as a group to this wasteland. And this time the circumstances were such that I had to stay for 2 hours more, and I was walking home alone. After walking about 20 meters, I felt that there was someone behind me. I looked around and I saw 2 dogs. It was dark, they were walking silently and busily behind, and it was unpleasant. And it got even worse when I saw that the other dogs began to appear from all sides of the wasteland, slowly heading towards me. There were a lot of them. I did not even try to count them. Silently, like ghosts, they surrounded me. I stopped. Firstly, I was terrified, and secondly, I remembered that it was better not to run away and not to do anything at all, especially since they had not yet shown aggressiveness. The dogs were getting closer, and when I was a few steps away from the nearest one, I closed my eyes. When I told my family and friends about this story, I explained it by saying that I remember that dogs cannot stand human eyes, and I didn't want to make them angry. But in fact, the eyes closed by themselves from fear. I don't remember how long I stood there, not seeing anything. I felt movement around me. Wet noses poked me several times, and shaggy dog fur slid over my skin. Then there was silence. I opened my eyes. There was no one ahead. I looked around. The dogs were sitting in the back a few meters away from me. There were a lot of them. They settled down in a circle, looking at each other, not moving and not making a single sound. They did not seem to notice me. How long I stood there afraid to move, I can't say, but not less than half an hour. My legs were numb, my back began to ache, and nothing changed around, and that made it even scarier. I shifted from one foot to another, no reaction. Took a small step forward, again nothing. Emboldened, I began to leave little by little. Not a single dog even turned its head. It is very difficult to move with the face turned back so as not to miss what is happening from behind. And at some point I couldn't stand it. Forgetting all the tricks, poking and choking with sobs, I rushed to the village. No one ran after me. While the wasteland was visible, I could make out the dark silhouettes of dogs sitting motionless in it. This story does not get out of my head. It was not made up. I didn't exaggerate anything. It's all true. I'm not a canine scientist, so I have no right to draw conclusions, but I'm sure that the dogs did not get there by chance. It was evident from the way they walked, and they were also sitting for a reason. They were conferring, discussing. but I don't understand what and how they managed to do it in silence. The next episode, The Outcasts. This was told by Ignatenko from the Russian city of Yaroslavl. Constantly and with interest watching the animals, I came to the conclusion that all of them, regardless of the species, live according to certain laws. I do not mean the laws of nature. We're talking about the unwritten laws of relationships. It even seems to me that having devoted his life to this, some meticulous researcher could sort out and write down a certain moral code, and maybe even a criminal code of the animal world, which they probably have. I will tell you about 3 cases that I have observed myself and which fit into one scheme. The actors in the first case were dogs, in the second rooks, and in the third cats. There is a landfill not far away from our dacha village, not urban but created by summer residents themselves. Dogs once brought to guard the owner's goods and then abandoned by people without a pang of conscience, well, they're on to our cities. There are a lot of them, but we know all of our own. We feed them, we gave them names, they're used to. I don't know how they survive in winter. Of course, some of the dachas are inhabited in winter, but there are not enough wintering, summer residents who come to spend the winter here for all the abandoned human friends. Dacha refers to a country home, a vacation home in Russian. Probably the dogs dispersed to nearby villages and towns in order to get together again for the summer season. And then one day, passing by the landfill, I saw a strange picture. Our dogs were sitting motionless in a circle, in the center of which was one of them. I fed it more than once, and I knew that the dog's name was Belka. Belka was sitting with its head down, and all the dogs were looking at the dog. I smacked my lips, even whistled, no reaction. I became curious, and I began to wait for how it would all end. The dogs seemed to be playing a child's game of freeze. I was even startled when after 10 to 15 minutes, one of them barked. The whole pack immediately responded with barking, howling, screeching, and everyone rushed to the center, to Belka. I was afraid that the dog would be killed, and armed with a stick, I began to shout and wave it, trying to disperse the dogs. But they just did not pay attention to me, and they were out of reach. Belka broke out of the circle and raced towards the forest. After running 100 meters behind it, the dog stopped, as if on command, and they ran back. While the unfortunate victim of the dog pack was running away from its fellows, I managed to notice that Belka was running smoothly. There were no wounds on it, and the dogs could catch up with it if they wanted, but they didn't. They were just chasing Belka. Happily waving their tails, the whole team ran up to me and escorted me to the dacha. I never saw Belka again. The second time I saw a very similar picture when rooks arranged a similar meeting not far from the same place. Rook, it's a black bird whose large flocks signal the arrival of spring. Everything was repeated one to one, so to say, but only the ending was more tragic. After the first bird cry that broke the silence, the whole flock began to scream and rushed at the bird in the center of the circle, like a black cloud. I thought it would be chased away like Belka, but when the flock scattered, a mangled, bloody ball of feathers lay on the ground, all that remained of the unfortunate rook. The third time I watched a completely different scene, but I'm sure it echoes the first two. It was this time already in the city in March, at the time of feline mating seasons, cat weddings, they say in Russian. Anyway, anyone who has seen cats fighting knows that at the moment when they're sitting opposite each other making faces to frighten and screaming in wild voices, it is almost impossible to drive them away from each other. The cat's rule not to show your back to the enemy is stronger than any fear of a person or a dog. At such moments, they should simply be feared. If you get into their cat fight, then even your own cat can attack its owner. The cats of March were yelling on the lawn in front of my window. There were several pairs of them. Each paid not the slightest attention to the other. Apparently, according to the results of the qualifying matches, the winners would meet in quarterfinals, then in semifinals, and the reward, some kind of a torn cat, would go to the one who wins the final fight. People who were dazed by wild screams threw everything they could at them from the windows. They poured water on them, but the fighters ignored what was happening around them. Not far away sat a few more cats who did not participate in the competition. Their brothers and sisters also did not pay attention to them. And suddenly, as if the referee whistled, everything changed. Forgetting about each other and the rule not to turn their backs to the opponent, all the fighters rushed in the same direction. A cat was racing ahead, being chased by everyone else. It was unclear what it had done to them and how they all saw it at the same time. It seemed that the cat who came up somehow insulted everyone at the same time. Maybe it called them a bad word, cast them out, but the insult was so unbearable that no one could stand it. Or maybe this poor being was once expelled like Belka and dared to return, which was immediately reported by someone from the feline audience. I do not know. While I was thinking, the cats returned to their seats and the March cacophony sounded with the same force. These three cases have left me in no doubt that there are laws in the animal world that cannot be flouted, and violators are waiting for not just punishment, but a sentence passed by a tailed and feathered court. Telepathy or clairvoyance. From the letter of Praskurniak from the city of Chernivtsi in Ukraine. Transportation in our town is bad, and I walk to work for 30 to 40 minutes, mostly through the courtyards, alleys, trying to shorten the way as much as possible. I've been walking for 5 years. Before that, I worked closer for 2 years, 20 minutes of walking. In all the 7 years, I have been escorted to work and met by the cat named Vaska. It lives under our porch. There I made a place for it. I laid hay, put a rag, and I carry food to the cat there. It wandered into my yard once and stayed there. And a surprisingly wonderful cat it turned out to be. I feed the cat along with the other animals even before I go to work. And when it's time for 8:15, it's already on the porch, waiting for me to see me off. And then it follows me all the way, one step away from me. And it is not afraid of dogs. We have a lot of them. And for some reason, they do not touch that cat. And when I leave work at 5 o'clock, it is already waiting. And again, we walk together. I am in front, the cat is behind me. I thought at first that it was sitting at my workplace all day, but no. It's at home during the day. My children and neighbors see the cat all the time. So it leaves and then it comes back. How does the cat know time? I talk to people about this topic. How can a cat navigate by time? We thought and we made up our minds on sunny days by the sun and on cloudy days by some natural signs. After all, they animals are closer to nature than we are. Maybe they understand what is not given to us to understand. Vaska has a strange feature. It doesn't meow. I've only heard that voice once, and it was when we were walking by my brother's birthday and went out late, and in the morning I overslept for the first time in my life. And at 8:15, Vaska woke me up. It meowed on the porch until I came out. Since then, it has not done so. But this is not the main thing. I would not take up your time with stories about the quirks of my cat if not for one inexplicable fact. Some days they let us go home early, and there were several other cases when I took leave from work, and Vaska could not have known about it, but always as if someone informed it, the cat met me and escorted me home. You don't think that the cat comes out earlier and waits? No. In one of these cases, my friend told me that she saw Vaska running through the city to my work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as if a pack of dogs were chasing it. And in another, my daughter told me that she was feeding it and the cat suddenly froze, pricked up its ears, stopped eating and rushed to run from the yard. And I myself once left work an hour earlier and Vaska was not there. I was very surprised and even worried if something had happened. I go home and it rushes towards me, breathing like bellows. And when it knows the holidays and when I take time off at my own expense, the cat doesn't wake up in the morning. It hangs out somewhere all day, and at 5 in the evening the cat is already on the porch. And no one can explain this by any natural science. And I'm thinking, Vaska and I have a telepathic connection. Only the cat can read my mind and I can't read its mind. It turns out that cats are smarter than people. Here is another story, Beyond Distances. This is from a letter of Chernovoy from Moscow. One summer I was traveling by plane from a business trip. On the way, watching the kitten play with which our fellow travelers were taking with them, my neighbor and I began to exchange impressions. From him I heard a story that I remembered for many years. My family, told me the neighbor, was going to spend a vacation with distant relatives. They lived far away, 10 to 12 hours by train. There was no one to leave our cat Murzik with, and after a long argument they decided to take it with us. We stayed with relatives for more than a month. They received us perfectly, and they loved Murzik very much. The cat was courted, pampered, admired for its antics, and the cat seemed to get used to and fell in love with kind and nice people. The time has come for departure. And then both adults and children began to ask us to leave Murzik with them. They asked me in tears, and we decided. It seemed that it would be better for the cat. He stayed with us alone. He stayed alone while we were at work. And here you are always close to loving and caring people. So we cried and said goodbye and left. Yes, 3 weeks later we received a letter from which we learned that Murzik had disappeared, and the search for it did not yield any results. There were no limits to the feelings and grief of relatives, and we all blamed ourselves for leaving, not saving our pet. 6 months have passed. There wasn't a day that we didn't remember our cat, and then one truly beautiful day we saw it under our doors, thin, dirty, and exhausted. There were no limits to our joy, but how Murzik could find its way home will forever remain a mystery to us. There are a lot of such stories documented, collected, and logic suggests there could be even more of them. It's just that not all Murziks were lucky to overcome the dangerous passage, and some of them simply died without ever seeing their owners again. These stories, and there is no doubt about their authenticity, baffle the scientific world. Animals had never been to the places where people moved before, so no compass could help them. The best nose in the world would be powerless here. There are no traces behind the departing plane with the owners on board. What then is the answer? It remains to assume that the animals for thousands of kilometers heard the thoughts of their owners and went to the signals like a beacon. Here is a very interesting story, how a cat saved a human life. It's from the letter of Anishuk from the city of Vladimir in Russia. I work at a small compressor station with ancient equipment. I don't know where our chief mechanic got these wonders of technology, but I always longed for him to spend at least a day in the infernal roar among the incandescent and smoking units. Almost every day we did our Sisyphean gigantic work. We repaired mountain compressors. One day I came to work and I saw at the very door a gray lump. It was a kitten. It saw me and immediately jumped up on its thin paws with a desperate meow and began rubbing against the leg. Of course, I fed the poor animal, I caressed it, and I called it Vaska. It sleeps in my booth during the day. It hunts mice at night. The cat eats and does not forget to share with me. Every morning 2 or 3 strangled mice appear on the table. One day I came out of the booth to add oil to the compressors, and then Vaska, who was dozing sweetly, suddenly jumped up and rushed headlong to the front door, fussing, yelling, rushing out. I opened the door for it, and I followed the cat out to see what had happened and where it was in such a hurry. I had just taken a step when I heard a terrible screeching, whistling, thuds, and the sound of broken glass behind me. Immediately, from 2 compressors, meter-long steel fan blades broke off and like rockets crashed into my cabin. Glass and appliances shattered. The chair I was sitting on a minute ago was overturned. Since then, a deep dent has been left on the wooden back of the chair. As for the visionary Vaska, I and both of my colleagues from incoming shifts unconditionally recognized it as a freelance expert mechanic, and now during the shift we occasionally glance at our cat. How is it doing there? Now here is a story of the witch cat. This is from the letter of Vinyukova in Ulyanovsk, town of Ulyanovsk. Vinyukova has a psychic cat. Its name is Lukeria. The cat always medically treated Vinyukova's whole family. It came and lay down on the sore spot. And indeed, after each such session, the patients became better. Usually the cat did not impose itself on the family. It was very detached from general family interest. Their other household members stayed away from it. They were afraid. Although the cat was not aggressive, it didn't like being distracted by all sorts of nonsense from its ever dreamy state. Twice the cat informed Vinyukovas of trouble. For the first time, when the ambulance took Vinyukova's husband's state from work to the operation, it screamed, rushed around the house, it tore things up. And the second time, on the night when their dog Bim disappeared, Lukeria, who was sleeping peacefully on the sofa, suddenly jumped off the sofa, began to whiz, terribly twitch its paws. What has Vinyukova not done to help her? She thought the cat was dying. Vinyukova laid a towel for it to bury the cat in and sat next to the animal all night long. In the morning she fell asleep, and when she woke up, the cat jumped off the couch itself as if this terrible night had not happened. That's when the thought occurred to Vinyukova that something had happened to the dog Bim, and it didn't just go out and it didn't just come home. And indeed, they never saw Bim again. Here is the tales of dispersing the devils. These are experts from the letters, the names of authors, of which Vadim Teruzhinsky, my colleague from Belarus, who collected the reports, he doesn't provide names for obvious reasons. So here is one about the unnamed woman who stated this. Her husband is an alcoholic, but the conversation is not about him. This is the trouble of her family, and they are trying to cope with it. It's about their dog. An ordinary mongrel, Jack, devotedly loves the storyteller's husband. During the good periods, it doesn't leave him a step. After all, in fact, before his illness, it was difficult to find a kinder and warmer person than her Victor, and the dog can smell it. In the bad periods, it runs, looks for him, brings him home, and honestly guards the man when he is unconscious. And the dog is guarding him from something only the two of them know. More than once, she witnessed some mystical fights of Jack with an opponent invisible to the woman. Jack suddenly became alert, growled, jumped up, and rushed at what seemed to be someone invisible. Wild jumps, snapping teeth, growling, screeching made her hair stand on end. As a rule, these were the moments when Victor drove the devils, as they say in Russian, in a fever. She would have understood if the dog had rushed at him when he was waving his arms, driving away his visions. But Jack was fighting with what was next to him, next to the husband. Did he also see the devils of her husband? And here's another letter that Deruzinski has. Her daughter was ill, very high fever and delirium. Sima the cat was sleeping nearby. The daughter was muttering, moaning, sprawled on the pillow. The woman was sitting next to her, crying quietly and changing cold compresses on her head. At some point, the daughter rushed around with special force, screamed and began waving her arms as if driving someone away. That's when the cat jumped. At first, the woman was afraid that it was going to cling to her daughter now. And it really clung, but not to her, but to something invisible to the woman next to her daughter. It was very scary. Soundlessly, the cat rolled on the bed in a deadly fight, and its fur flew in shreds. Then the cat chased this something off the bed, and the fight continued on the floor. Judging by the behavior of the cat, it, the other entity, was trying to climb up because Sima jumped high, caught something, pressed it to the floor again and tore at it. It seemed that it still escaped and flew away because after the last jump, the cat looked up at the ceiling for a long time and then, having come down, it began to lick, tidying up the disheveled wool. At the same time, her daughter calmed down and fell asleep. It was the night of the crisis when recovery began. Did the cat in the night battle drive away the disease? Look, in my videos about the Ural Mountains, I have talked about my mother's experiences in the World War II as a refugee from Nazi-occupied Ukraine when she was a little girl, and she was saved from hepatitis by local people and the ritual of the fish. I will not repeat it here, but I think you should watch those videos about the Ural Mountains. I personally had my own experiences with animals that behaved in a very odd manner, bordering on paranormal. I have discussed some of them in my videos too. Now, let me tell you about this story, conveyed to Russian author Alexander Bushkov by former Soviet KGB officers back in the 1980s, when they were quite elderly and wanted to share their experiences from earlier times. It's about a deed of gallantry, if you can call this. First, let me explain something. The basmachi is a word, a plural form of the Uzbek basmachi, meaning bandits, raiders. This was how the Russians referred to an uprising against the Russian Imperial and later Soviet rule by the Muslim peoples of Central Asia. The movement's roots lay in the anti-conscription violence of 1916 that erupted when the Russian Empire began to draft Muslims. Soviet scholarship characterized the basmachi as mere brigands and counter-revolutionaries in the pay of British imperialists. But actually it was a struggle for national liberation against the colonial power, although the extent to which the participants overcame localism and factionalism is unclear. The Soviet war in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989 and subsequent events have renewed interest in the basmachi rebels and given their struggle a broader resonance. I also mentioned one of the strangest personalities in the Soviet history, the head of one of the departments of the KGB at the time, who conducted paranormal research while in his younger years fighting during the Russian Civil War, and then later he was sent to Central Asia and he put down the basmachi rebellions. I've discussed this before, but so let me talk about the year 1929 in the autumn, about this case. This took place somewhere near the Afghan border. The Red Army 3-man border patrol was ambushed, and things were going badly for them. The senior border guard in this patrol, wounded in the chest, had already stopped shuddering and wheezing. He lay completely motionless, and the two horses that fell under well-aimed and unexpected volley of shots, they died, which in current situation was only good for the two remaining border guards because they were hiding from the hail of bullets behind the horse corpses. The names of the border guards were Yusuf and Vasily, or Vasya, in short. It cannot be said that the Basmachi especially pressed on. There was no need to. Very likely they knew the schedule of the Red Border Guard detachments and patrol tactics. They were very confident. They were not fussy. The impression was they knew that the detachment was caught at the beginning of a long passage, and the Red Army outpost command would start worrying only in the evening. And it was still far from the evening. It was barely noon. Basmachi did not push themselves into trouble. They lay down and they fired rifles, not even trying to encircle yet. Their actions demonstrated people who were skilled, confident that the prey would not go somewhere, would not get away. It looked like they were going to take the prey alive, and that was bad for the border guards. Well, the border guards were not novices either. After calculating, the border guards realized that they were surrounded by about 20 people, and you can't shoot back with two carbines at the Basmachi horde, and there was not a single grenade to blow themselves up when all else fails. That was bad. In general, they saved the cartridges as much as they could. One Basmach was seriously shot, and a couple were wounded, which was not a God knows what achievement given the numerical superiority of the enemy. It's also good that they themselves have not yet been shot, those two border guards, but the bullets were hitting into the horses' carcasses, not allowing the border guards to change positions. It is not known what Yusuf was thinking about. He certainly did not pray. He was completely indifferent to religion. As for Vasily, he went over and over in his mind a small set of favorable opportunities for them. And once again it turned out that only a miracle could save them. The outpost is about 8 kilometers away. Shots are unlikely to be heard there. The third horse actually galloped away. If it returned to the Red Army outpost, they would immediately figure out and raise everyone to go fight. But he remembered what loud gunfire, the direction the stallion had rushed to. That's what they heard. How quickly the shots died down and the triumphant screams that they heard. It looks like the horse was put down very quickly here nearby. As for their dog, it no longer had, they no longer had the smart, experienced, trained shepherd Grom. It was lying about 3 meters away with glazed eyes, its tongue hanging out, hit by the same first salvo of gunfire. So you can't send a dog with a report anymore. But there were similar cases, when a border dog broke through and help came on time. Not at their outpost really, but it happened at the neighboring one, and there was a similar case on the Polish border. Vasily started up, he raised his carbine, but it was Yusuf who crawled up, carefully flattening himself on the dry ground, stretched out next to Vasily, looking into his eyes. It was not the face of a colleague, but a frozen mask, and there was such wild tension in his eyes that Vasily felt uncomfortable. There was something incomprehensible in those eyes, not fear and not defeat of the approaching death. "Vasya," Yusuf said in a completely strange, unfamiliar voice, "write the report, briefly. Like they squeezed us, and if the red troops don't make it, he's gone mad." Vasya thought with a calmness that surprised him. It happens in such predicaments. "And why write?" asked Vasily listlessly. We'll send it to the outpost. A couple of rifle bullets flew disgustingly over their heads. This did not frighten Vasya. Rather, it finally drove him out of patience. It was too much. In addition to the basmachi, who surrounded them from all sides, he was his crazy partner. And who will deliver? Your mother? He barked in a whisper. The Holy Spirit. It, Yusuf said, pointing to the dead dog Grom. I will pick it up now. And you're right. Right, don't delay, Vasya. I can. The old people taught me. Everything will work out. Vasya was too crestfallen in his soul to be seriously angry. He simply tried to figure out what exactly to expect from the crazy Uzbek. It's good if he throws himself at full height under the bullets, but if he grabs the Vasily's throat, and if he tries, it's best to kick him with the rifle in his genitals. And then these thoughts completely flew out of Vasily's head. Because the dead dog Grom moved, the paws twitched, as if apart from the body by themselves, bent and unbent, and again. The head lifted with the same independent jerk, as on a string, jerked up and thudded to the ground. Right, I say, Yusuf groaned, all red, sweaty, staring wildly. He was lying on his side, with his cupped hands to his mouth, now exhaling noiselessly in a special way, then chanting something, loudly, stubbornly, wailing. Vasya knew a little Uzbek language, but what he heard did not sound like a human language at all. It was uncanny how this did not sound like human language, human speech. But the dog was moving. It was dead, but it moved. The dog jerked its paws, its head, shook its whole body, and its eyes remained motionless, glassy, and its tongue hung like a rag to the side, and there was no breathing. Vasily remembered that it had been whispered about Yusuf for a long time. He was a good Red Army soldier, but a secretive man, prone to devilry. No one knew anything for sure, but the whispers went on, at a prudent distance from their unit's commissar, who did not approve of mysticism, religious matters, and other belching of the old world. That's how they called it in the socialist Russia. Then all extraneous thoughts flew out of his head. A fierce hope replaced the dull hopelessness, and he, lying on his side, pressed into the ground in an uncomfortable position, began to frantically scribble on a piece of paper. He tore a piece of paper out of his notebook, folded it as usual, put it in his special messages holder, and securely fastened the button. Vasily inadvertently touched the dog's neck at the same time and shuddered with disgust. He was no longer Grom, but a stirring, cold-hardening, ossified something. The German shepherd rose on its parting paws, swayed, settled on four supports. It looked as if the scarecrow was being lifted on invisible crucifixes. And then the dog rushed away towards the outpost like a doll on strings, quickly, very quickly. Shots rang from all sides, and a lot of bullets hit the target with a nasty wooden thud. Vasya saw how the dog's body twitched, how holes appeared on the sides, but Grom, without stopping, never tripping, was carried away into the distance by an unfamiliar mechanical gait. From the Basmachi side, long-drawn screams were heard, in which was immediately felt there was much more fear than anger. Definitely someone was loudly mentioning shaitan or devil among those words. The nature of the shootout has changed. It became somewhat uncertain, as if the enemy was rearranging tactics on the move, choosing whether to rush into the attack or to retreat. The border guards fired back as best they could. It didn't last very long, and soon help came. At first the basmachi stopped shooting, then after a loud distinct command, they rushed to the horses. Shots were heard from the direction of the Red Army outpost. A couple of machine guns burst, and there were the half squadron arrived into the gorge in all its glory, with the roar of hooves, the flashing of blades, and a dashing highwayman's sharp whistle. The basmachi fled without the fight. This was to be expected. According to some of their superstitions, it was believed that a horseman killed with a saber blade, even if he was Orthodox 3 times over, would not get into Muslim paradise, no matter how he tried. Like someone who commits a suicide in the Russian Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition. So, they were saved in general. This happens not only in the movies, when help swoops in at the very last moment with whooping and stomping at full horse swing, And the unit commander, the cool guy, who had seen a lot in his life, for a long time beating Vasya and Yusuf on the backs, repeated excitedly, "Well, Vasya, you had quite a dog. He was a hero. Can you imagine? It ran to the gate, to the center, full of bullet holes, and just there it died. Wow, what a dog. Heroic. It's a pity we cannot save it. It has fulfilled its duty, huh? At least we should put up a monument to it." Vasily nodded, kept quiet. He didn't want to say anything, and who would believe it? Later, seizing the moment when they were alone, at a distance from the others, Yusuf came up and sincerely asked, "Don't tell anyone, please, please. And to what purpose? I shouldn't have anyway. At least the old people will not find out." Vasily nodded without hesitation. "You can be sure." And he was he was silent about what happened for almost half a century. Well, the last episode in this video is of my recollection from the late 1960s. There was a story that stirred the people in the Soviet Union at the time. A story was published in the newspaper, how a snake fell in love with a simple Soviet soldier who was undergoing military service in Central Asia. It crawled to the soldier at night, and he pushed it away and was scared and cried, and he wrote reports to the commanders, to higher authorities, but no one believed him, not even the company leader. And so the soldier, he died. And when they came to his grave one day, there at the tombstone, they found this very snake that had died of grief. For the USSR, where paranormal stories were not given any coverage in the media because of Marxist-Leninist ideology and censorship, this was an interesting development. Apparently, the reality in which the animals, albeit domesticated, live is still a significantly different reality from ours. They feel as part of the world around them, and what we do not feel and do not see. Perhaps for us, this is the price that the man paid for the right to be sentient or intellectual. With the acquisition of reason, we have lost other possibilities of perceiving the world that animals possess. As I researched the paranormal phenomena of Siberia and the Russian Far East, I have collected a few stories too. I'll share them one day. And allow me to introduce my colleague Vadim Vladimirovich Deruzhinsky, whose research I sometimes refer to. He was born in Russia, in Rostov-on-Don, and he has been living in Minsk, Belarus since 1977. He, by the way, served in the Strategic Rocket Forces troops in the Arhangelsk region. The Strategic Rocket Forces were the main Soviet force used for attacking an enemy's offensive nuclear weapons, its military facilities, and its industrial infrastructure. Well, later Vadim graduated from the Minsk State Pedagogical University of Foreign Languages. He worked as a translator in Bulgaria, and then for 5 years he was an advisor to the analytical department of the CIS Executive Secretariat in Minsk. CIS was the entity that was created after the fall of the USSR as an idea of the free union of independent states. We know how it worked out. From 1998 to the present, he is the editor-in-chief and co-publisher of the analytical newspaper Secret Research. He is author of books on the topics of the unknown and alternative history. I hope his fascinating books be translated and published in the English-speaking countries to start with, and then in other languages. I have a lot of videos where I will use his research too, as well as other capable and very knowledgeable Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian authors and researchers, and I'll mention their names. And today, this is what I wanted to let you know. If you can support my research, please do so. You will find the links in the description to this video. Please subscribe to my video and tell others. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for more videos.